I wasn't ever really interested in watching The Boys. I enjoy dark comedy and subversive takes on genre tropes, but I had heard that it was needlessly edgy, and hollow, try-hard edgy TV and comics don't appeal to me. But I was a guest at Atomicon, and there was a panel about The Boys and Watchmen, and I asked to be on the panel, and figured I would check it out. I'll talk about characters a little bit, but this review won't have any real spoilers past the first episode. I'm going to talk more about genre and tone and thematic content than any specific plot points. There are a couple of interesting plot twists in the show, and they're worth seeing in context if you decide you want to make time for the show yourself. The Boys is an Amazon Prime superhero show. Only one 8-episode season out now, with more on the way, and it's, of course, one of those darker, grittier takes on the superhero genre, though more in line with taking a sledgehammer to distinctly American superhero power fantasy myths that so many American spectators uncritically buy into, versus whatever it is that Zack Snyder does. He's an easy target at this point, but while I have a lot of qualms with The Boys, I would much rather rewatch all 8 episodes multiple times than sit through Batman v Superman again. Like ever. Like ever. I do agree 100% with anyone who told me that The Boys is kind of immature and edgy, or that it handles a lot of its more serious subject matter clumsily. In the first episode, there's a sexual assault that kicks off the show's Me Too plotline. There's another subplot later that involves a different sexual assault, and I really felt like that subplot handled the topic better and that it was more realistic. As I've said before, I don't think any one subject should be inherently taboo or off limits, especially in a show intended for adults. Of course, people with fame and money and power are often predators. But while the later plot and the kind of helplessness and rage the characters impacted by it felt real to me, the earlier one is handled in kind of a weird, immature way, especially as the show goes on. Although I will say that I prefer the way that either of these plot points were handled to the way that rape is handled in Game of Thrones. What I saw of it, I think that's kind of the standard for like, why is there so much rape in this show? Why is our culture like this? I would not say The Boys is like that. I think they take rape seriously, and I think it's an important part of the conversation, just that some aspects are definitely handled better than others. The Boys takes established superhero tropes and stock characters and looks at them through a harsher, more realistic, and much less idealistic lens. It's about the superhero as a brand. And while the show is clumsy sometimes in its messaging, it's a very strongly anti-capitalist, ruthlessly anti-capitalist, and anti-imperialist and anti-nationalist show. And honestly, as far as what power, money, or fame, or literal superpowers does, and how much it scrambles your brain and produces monsters, for any complaints that I have, The Boys is probably the most unflinching and realistic portrayal of what superpowered people existing under capitalism would be like that I've ever seen. Not the most sincere portrayal, necessarily, but with all the edginess and the centrist, both sidesy moments, still the best portrayal of this is how nasty and fucked up and weird all of these people would 100% be. That message is just sometimes hampered by other aspects of the show's tone and narrative that are a little try-hard or a little distracting. A lot of characters from marginalized backgrounds are just backgrounds that seem to vary from the show's default point of view, aren't caricatures. They aren't offensive, but they do very much feel like an edgy, angry, straight, atheist white guy's idea of a particular character. Like, A-Train thinks his girlfriend is so different and so special and cool because she likes dark beer. Oh my god. A woman? A hot woman who likes dark beer. And Starlight is so self-conscious and down about her powers because men in her life have been emasculated by her strength, as if realistically certain men wouldn't be lining up to date her. And she's also so shocked and appalled as a Christian character that there's homophobia in the weird superhero tent revival pray the gay away scene she's been involved with for her entire life, as if any progressive Christian would have been, like, blind to or unaware of that presence. And Queen Maeve is an interesting character in how she grapples with the horrifying reality of her job versus her public persona, but her tragic lesbian story is really underdeveloped. And I'm not saying the entire creative or writing staff or whatever is all cis-het white dudes, or that all of these characters are terrible or boring. A lot of them are interesting and fun to watch. It's just when the show gets away from that white dude writer perspective, it mires itself some in cliches. Fridging, whatever, and distracting and unrealistic, not like the other girls, attitudes. The show, again, isn't regressive, and these traits individually, and if handled in a more realistic or fleshed out manner, would be fine. There are sad alcoholic lesbians. There are Christians who are really oblivious or willfully blind to bigotry in the more extreme members of their faith. But often it feels like Huey and Butcher, the nerdy guy pulled into a crazy anti-superhero life because his girlfriend died tragically. Never heard of that one before. And angry, edgy anti-hero guy who says cunt a lot. Like a whole lot. And that makes him a badass. Wow. Also never heard of that one before, are more realistically rendered, or at least much more consistently and naturally rendered. And especially Huey is rendered in a way that won't take you out of the show. And I think that's because they are that default, like, edgy, straight, atheist white dude. And though Huey is definitely a trope character, oh, he's so sad because his girlfriend's dead, his story and that push and pull he feels between being a scared pacifist nerd and Butcher dragging him into his insane anti-superhero vengeance quest is fun and engaging to watch. And the Deep. The Deep is the worst character on the show. I don't want to get into spoilers. I don't want to talk about the Deep. But if you want to hear my opinion on him, ask in the comments. I'll respond because I'm not going to spend any more time on this video. I'm wasting more time on it. Where the show shines, and shines brilliantly, is with Homelander, the Captain America or Superman analog. Because I'm not getting into spoilers, I'm not going to say much that's specific about Homelander, but I will say that most of the show's best and most biting scenes involve him in one way or another. And he's a wonderfully acted and wonderfully rendered character for this type of show. This isn't a spoiler, really. You see it very early on. But there's also this baby in the show, and Homelander just hates that baby. And every scene with him and that baby, and just the idea of Captain America seeing a baby and being filled with rage is hysterical to me. So both the more serious scenes and kind of weird, dark running gags with him all worked really well. And I wish that thought and time and originality had also been put into other characters. I also like Black Noir and the running gag with him, and I accidentally spoiled some stuff about him not covered in the show yet for myself while reading about the comics, and it was something else. So I'm really interested to see how the show handles him in later seasons. Overall, my favorite performances in the show are probably from Anthony Starr, who plays Homelander, and also who I didn't even realize was from New Zealand until researching for this video.
And we had to have babies on set, so we get 4 babies. Every fucking baby screamed through.
And as soon as he touches this baby,
as soon as I touch the baby, I'm like the baby, the anti-whisperer.
And Elizabeth Shue, who plays a higher-up in the corrupt company that employs superheroes. When I said earlier that The Boys is not the most sincere show when it comes to subverting these tropes, I was speaking as a Venture Brothers fan. Just because of being distracted and busy, I'm a couple seasons behind on the Venture Brothers, but I love it. It's one of my biggest creative influences and inspirations, and has been for a very long time. It's hysterical and at times moving, and it has so much depth and thought and meticulous detail put into each moment. And while it deals with extremely taboo subject matter and gives very harsh, dark, cynical readings of superhero and other deeply ingrained in the public consciousness pop culture tropes, it never feels forced. Whenever anything gross or sad or weird or dark happens, it feels natural, like a natural consequence of the world that the characters live in. There are some Billy Butcher scenes I really liked in The Boys, but often the character grated on my nerves. And it's kind of funny to imagine him in the Venture Brothers universe, just skulking and cussing and smashing things. People would want to avoid him. Not because of that scene that happens over and over again in The Boys, like, that Billy Butcher. Why, I haven't seen that asshole in years. Not since the Mallory incident. But just because he's unstable and really needlessly mean and vulgar and deceptive. He's portrayed as this anti-establishment badass. But really, he's a little bit much at times. And I feel like Venture Brothers has that same impulse to critique superhero myths. Maybe not so much a strictly anti-capitalist critique, but more the really pathetic human failures of masculinity and of those same myths to live up to their promises. And The Boys would never critique masculinity in that same natural and empathetic and human way. I mean, it's The Boys. We mostly get a scene where Huey asks Butcher to say cunt as an insult less. That is well-intentioned. Like, I'm glad it's there, but it's pretty weird and awkward and like baby's first feminism. Like, yeah, you shouldn't say cunt all the time. I feel like that's kind of really basic human interaction. I don't know whether or not I would recommend The Boys. There are some great ideas, and some really funny or clever or just devastating scenes. And then there are moments that are just so tired and unintentionally goofy and cliched. I'd say that if you can stomach a lot of edgy, clumsy, immature, grimdark content in the service of a brutal and, in the end, interesting and surprising critique of capitalism and people as brands and hero worship and so on, then it's probably worth it. But that there are other shows and comics that subvert similar tropes in a more clever and consistent way that do not have those same issues. Like, again, the Venture Brothers, or One's work, One Punch Man and Mob Psycho 100, with both being much goofier and more positive, but still emotionally impactful explorations of the downsides of superpowers, or a million other shows or comics. Certain ones very old and very influential and very well known at this point. I think I will be watching season 2, mostly out of curiosity as to how certain plotlines resolve, but I should probably catch up on Venture Brothers and finally check out the new Tick show first. Also, please listen to Critical Bits.
Truly a spooky where's my fucking spooky sign? I just realized I've been up here for an hour, I don't even have it.
It's a dark comedy, body horror, teen superhero actual play podcast that I'm on, and it's very gruesome, but also very gay. That's the Critical Bits promise. There is definitely more than one gay, and they're not all sad or evil. If you'd like to support me making more video essays, reviews, so on, check out my Patreon. Link in the description for my Patreon and for Critical Bits, and for a Red Letter Media discussion of The Boys they had a different take on the show than I did, but I think it's worth watching. I think it's interesting. Anyway, thank you for watching.